Welcome to our channel Learning Math. In this video, we're going to learn how to simplify, add or subtract and square roots. In addition to solve x squared, for example, equals 16, how to solve it to find the exact value of x. Now let's start together. Some numbers should be simplified using prime factorization in order to determine their square roots. For example, here we have radical 108. To determine its radical, we should decompose it using prime factorization. You know that 108 is divisible by 2. It's divided by 2, it gives us 54. Also, divisible by 2, it gives us 27. Now, 27, we can divide it by 3, it gives us 9. Also, 9 divided by 3 gives us 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. Sure, we keep on dividing by prime numbers to get the value 1. Now, let's count them. How many 2 are we having? 2. Also, how many 3? We are having 3. So we can write 108 equals 2 to the power 2 times 3 to the power 3. Now we can replace it below the radical. Well, since we have times the squared number, we can get rid of it outside the radical. So we can write it as 2 radical 3. Well, note that 3 to the power 3, here we have an odd number. It remains below the radical, but we can decompose it into 3 times 3 square to pick up a number carrying even power, also to get rid of it outside the radical. Here 3 square, we can also write it outside the radical. But note something before, we have nothing between 2 and radical 3 times 3 square. When we have nothing, so it's times. Now we want to get rid of 3 outside the radical. How to write it? It will be 2 times 3 radical 3. Sure, here 3 remains below the radical. Now 2 times 3 is 6 radical 3. Well, note something which is very important. If we have a plus or minus, we cannot solve in this way. We cannot neither get 2 outside the radical nor 3. This case is only available when we have times or divided by. This is very important. Well, some numbers we can write them without simplifying. For example, 121 is 11 square, 144 12 square, 169 is 13 square. We can memorize all of these numbers. In addition, we can also replace 80 directly by 5 times 16. 16 is 4 square. 75, for example, we can write it as 3 times 25, which is 5 square. 125 is also 5 times 25. 48 is 3 times 16. 72 is 2 times 36, which is 6 square. And 108 is 3 times 36, which is 6 square. To get rid of the square number directly outside the radical. Well, now let's learn together how to add and subtract in square roots. There are two conditions that are very important. The first one, we should have the same radical. Well, let's see this example together. As you see here, we have 5 radical 27 plus radical 300 minus 2 radical 48. But if you note, they are not the same radical. Here we have radical 27, here we have radical 300, here radical 48. So we can never solve them together. But in order to get the same radical, if you note something here, we can simplify them. 27, for example, is 3 times 9. Also, 300 is 3 times 100. Also, we can write 48 as 3 times 16, which is 4 square. Now we can replace 9 by 3 square. 10 square, we can write 10 directly outside the radical, so it's 10 radical 3 since we have times. Here also 16, we can replace it by 4 square. Now we can write the square numbers directly outside the radical since we have times. So here 5 times 3 radical 3, it gives us 15 radical 3 plus 10 radical 3. Also here 4 square, we write it outside the radical. 2 times 4, 8 radical 3. We directly get rid of 4 outside the radical since we have here times. Well, here if you note, we get radical 3 in the first, second and the third term. So we have satisfied the first condition, which is we should have the same radical. What about the second one? Add or subtract the coefficients. What's the coefficient? The coefficient is the number that is directly in front of the radical. What are the coefficients here? 15, 10 and minus 8. So we can directly add or subtract them. 15 plus 10 minus 8, as if they are common factor, all multiplied by radical 3. 15 plus 10, 25, minus 8, it gives us 17 radical 3. Let's solve together other examples. Here we have 4 radical 32 minus 3 radical 200 plus 5 radical 50 plus 162. Well, we can easily replace 32 by 2 times 16, which is 4 square. Here 200 is 2 times 100, which is 10 square. Also 50 is 2 times 25, which is 5 square. What about 162? It's also 81 times 2, which is 9 square times 2. If you don't know this, you can directly simplify it using prime factorization. Well, 162, if we simplify it divided by 2, it gives us 81, which is 9 square, or we can complete decomposing it. 81 divided by 3 gives us 27, divided by 3 it gives us 9, divided by 3 3, divided by 3 1. If you note here, it's 2 times the 3 to the power 4, since we have 3 4 times. Well, now if you note here, 4 is an even power, we can divide it by 2. Now let's solve them together. Here 16 is 4 squared, so it's 4 radical 2 times 4 squared, minus here we can get rid of 10 outside the radical, since we have times. 10 times 3, 30. 5 radical 2 times 25, which is 5 squared. Here is radical 2 times 3, we divide the power by 2, so it's a 3 squared all squared, since 4 divided by 2 gives us 2. Well, 4 we can write it outside the radical. 4 times 4, 16, radical 2, minus 30 radical 2, we write it. Here 5 square outside the radical 5, 5 times 5, 25, radical 2, 2 remains below the radical. Also here, if you know something, well, it's radical 3 squared all square. This square cancels the radical for 3 squared. Well, 3 square will be outside the radical. 3 square is 9, so we can write it directly 9. 2, since it's not squared, it remains below the radical. Now note that they are all the same radical. We have satisfied the first condition. Now we can add or subtract the coefficients, which are 16 minus 30 plus 25 plus 9, all multiplied by radical 2. Now we solve them, we get it 20 radical 2. Another example, minus radical 48 plus 2 radical 75 plus 4 radical 108 minus radical 147. Well, 108, you know, we can decompose it. We have just solved an example about it. 108 is 2 square times 3 cube. Also 147, we can decompose it directly. It's divisible by 3. 1 plus 4, 5 plus 7, 12. It's a multiple of 3, so it's divisible by 3. 147 divided by 3, it gives us 49. Divided by 7, it gives us 7. Also divided by 7, it gives us 7. So we can write 147 as 3 times 7 square. Here, sure, 48, we can easily decompose it 3 times 16. 75 is 3 times 25. 108, we can write it as 3 times 36, or we can write it 2 square times 3 cube. We simplify it. 147 is also 3 times 7 square. Now 16 is 4 squared. 25, 5 square, we write it outside the radical. 5 times 2 is 10. Radical 3, 3 sure remains below the radical since it's not squared. Here also 2 squared, we get rid outside. 2 times 4 is 8. It's 8 radical. 3 cube, we can write it as 3 times 3 squared. Also here 7 square, we can write it outside the radical, so it's 7 radical 3. Now sure 4, we can write it outside the radical, so it's minus 4 radical 3 plus 10 radical 3. Here plus 3 times 8, 24 radical 3 minus 7 radical 3. Now we are having the same radical, we add and subtract the coefficients, we get it 23 radical 3. Now let's start by an activity which is very important. If we have, for example, x squared equals 16, let's think about it. What numbers do we raise square to give us 16? Actually, 4 squared equals 16. Also, minus 4 squared gives us 16. Why? minus, since we have a square which is an even power, it becomes a plus. 4 squared is 16, so it's a plus 16, which is equal to 16. So we have two values that are raised square and give us 16. These two values are 4, which is plus 4, and also minus 4. So we can say that x squared equals 16, then x equals a plus or minus radical 16, which is a plus or minus 4. We should keep in mind the two cases that are plus and minus 4, which are raised square to give us 16. Another example, here we are just having an activity to conclude a rule. Also, 2 squared gives us 4 and minus 2 squared gives us 4. Since minus squared is a plus, 2 squared is 4. Well, if x squared equals 4, then we conclude that x can be plus or minus 2. So it's a plus or minus radical 4 equal plus or minus 2. Here is another example which is by the same case. Now we conclude a rule. When we have x squared equal a in general, then x equals plus or minus radical a. Example, x squared equals 169. We can solve it directly writing x equal plus or minus radical 169, which is 13 squared, so it's equal plus or minus 13. Another example, if we have x squared equals 32, we can write x equals a plus or minus radical 32. We can either write it as 2 power 5, which is even power, odd power. We decompose it to the power 4 times 2, which is 2 squared all squared times 2. Now we can get rid of this square, so it's plus or minus 2 squared radical 2 equal plus or minus 4 radical 2. Or you can replace 32 by 2 times 16, the same result. Well, another example, if we have here, for example, x squared equals 4 over 9, then we can say x equals a plus or minus radical 4 over 9, so it's plus or minus radical 2 square over 3 square, it gives us plus or minus 2 over 3. The other example here are similar to the previous. In the next video, we're going to learn how to multiply square roots. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe.